The conference room on the second floor of the Capitol felt smaller than usual, and it was 4:47 p.m. on March 12, 2025, when the emergency Democratic caucus meeting had been called with less than 2 hours' notice. No press, no cameras, just 212 House Democrats crammed into chairs that suddenly felt too close together, the kind of proximity that makes tension unbearable, and Nancy Pelosi sat at the head of the long table, her hands folded with deliberate precision, her expression unreadable in that way that comes from decades of political warfare, because she'd held this room before, hundreds of times, commanded it really, her presence alone enough to silence conversations and straighten postures. But today, something was different. Something in the air felt charged, unstable, because the younger members weren't looking down at their phones or notebooks like they usually did. They were looking at her, waiting, watching, their eyes carrying a mixture of respect and something else, something that looked almost like challenge. And at the far end of the table, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat perfectly still, her phone face down beside a blank notepad, her posture relaxed in a way that made experienced politicians nervous, because they recognized it as the calm before confrontation, the stillness of someone who had already decided to fight, and the tension had been building for weeks, really, for months, ever since Democrats had lost that special election in Wisconsin's 3rd District, a seat Biden won by 8 points in 2020, the third loss in 4 consecutive months, and cable news had spent the entire morning dissecting what went wrong. Panels of analysts offering competing theories about messaging failures and voter fatigue, while Republicans crowed about a red wave continuation and started making predictions about a 2026 landslide. And everyone in the room knew what was coming: the blame game, the circular firing squad, the desperate search for scapegoats that always follows electoral defeat. But this wasn't just about one election. This was about 2 fundamentally incompatible visions of the Democratic Party colliding in real time. 2 generations with different values and different strategies fighting for the soul of an institution that couldn't survive serving both. And everyone in that room knew, even if they wouldn't admit it, that whatever happened in the next hour would define the party's direction for years to come, would determine whether Democrats moved left toward the movements or center toward the moderates. And Pelosi's chief of staff had whispered something urgent to her as she entered, something about leaked text messages from progressive staffers, and she'd nodded once with that tight expression that meant she was already 3 moves ahead, then taken her seat with the confidence of someone who'd survived far worse than this. And behind her, through the tall windows overlooking the National Mall, the late afternoon sun cut sharp geometric angles across the marble floors, and the room smelled faintly of coffee that had been sitting too long, and the kind of tension that makes people breathe shallow. And when Pelosi cleared her throat just once, the room fell silent instantly, because that's what happened when Nancy Pelosi wanted to speak. That's the power she still commanded even after stepping down as Speaker. "We need to talk about messaging," she said, her voice measured and controlled, the voice of someone who'd navigated 1,000 political storms and emerged victorious from most of them. And no one responded immediately. A few members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone's phone buzzed and was quickly silenced. "And our candidates," Pelosi continued, letting her gaze sweep across the room with deliberate slowness, "are being labeled as too far left. Defund the police, open borders, socialism." She paused after each phrase, letting each word land like a small stone in still water, watching the ripples. "These labels are killing us in swing districts. They're killing us with moderate voters. They're killing us with the working class voters we used to own." And a few older members nodded in agreement. Congressman Henry Cuellar from Texas leaned back in his chair with arms crossed and an expression that said he'd been making this exact argument for 2 years. Congressman Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey stared at the table with the look of someone who'd been saying this privately for months and was relieved someone finally said it publicly. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger from Virginia looked almost vindicated, and "some of those labels," Pelosi said, her tone sharpening just slightly, just enough to signal that the real point was coming. are coming from within our own party, from members who seem more interested in social media engagement than electoral victory. And now people looked up, several members glanced instinctively, toward the far end of the table, and AOC didn't move, didn't react. Her hands rested flat on the table's surface. Her expression remained neutral, almost serene, but her eyes stayed fixed on Pelosi with an intensity that people near her could feel. And Pelosi's gaze scanned the room slowly, deliberately, landing on each of the younger progressive members in turn. Cori Bush from Missouri, who looked defiant, Rashida Tlaib from Michigan, who was taking notes, Jamal Bowman from New York, whose jaw was clenched, and then, unmistakably, on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the squad. Pelosi said, not with venom or anger, but with surgical precision, the tone of a doctor delivering a diagnosis, has become a liability to this party, a fundraising goldmine for Republicans, a constant source of controversy that drowns out our message and costs us votes we can't afford to lose. And the room inhaled collectively, the kind of sharp intake of breath that happens when something unsaid finally gets said, and AOC's pen tapped once against her notepad, just once, a single sharp sound in the silence. She didn't look up yet, but everyone in the room felt the shift in energy, the way you feel the air pressure drop before a storm, the way animals sense earthquakes before they happen, and Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, sitting to Pelosi's right and clearly hoping to prevent the collision everyone could see coming, leaned forward quickly. "Congresswoman Pelosi, maybe we should—" "But no," AOC said quietly, and the word cut through Jeffrey's sentence like a blade through silk. Heads turned. Several people actually swiveled in their chairs to look at her, and she looked up now, slowly, deliberately, her eyes meeting Pelosi's across the length of the table, across the gulf of generation and ideology and political philosophy. If we're talking about messaging, let's talk about all of it. Let's talk about everything, not just the parts that make consultants comfortable. And Pelosi's expression didn't change because she'd been in rooms like this for 4 decades. She'd stared down presidents and speakers and CEOs and foreign leaders. She'd negotiated with people far more intimidating than a freshman congresswoman, even one with 13 million Twitter followers and a media presence that rivaled her own. And go ahead, Congresswoman, Pelosi said evenly, her tone suggesting she was granting permission, maintaining control, and AOC leaned forward slightly, just an inch, but it changed her entire posture from passive to active, her voice calm, but carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "With respect, Congresswoman Pelosi, your strategy lost us the House in 2022. We ran on nothing, we defended nothing, we apologized for everything, we let Republicans define every single issue and never fought back." And there were audible gasps. Someone near the middle of the table muttered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Congressman Sean Casten from Illinois looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair or possibly through the floor. Several staffers along the back wall exchanged wide-eyed glances, and Pelosi's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the kind of micro-expression that only people who knew her well would catch, but her voice stayed level, professional. "We ran on protecting democracy, on accountability, on defending the rule of law against authoritarian threats. We ran on our accomplishments, infrastructure, climate investment, student debt relief. And we lost," AOC said, not loud, not emotional, just factual, just stating the obvious truth that everyone was dancing around. "We lost the House. We barely held the Senate. And now we're losing special elections in districts we should win easily, in districts where our policies are actually popular if we just fight for them. And because voters in Pennsylvania and Arizona," Pelosi shot back, her voice rising just enough to command the room, just enough to remind everyone who had the decades of experience here, "don't want to hear about defunding the police. They want jobs, they want safety, they want their kids to get a good education, they don't want socialism or revolutionary rhetoric or Twitter fights. And then stop calling it socialism," AOC said, her tone hardening, her voice cutting. Medicare for all polls at 70%, Green New Deal policies poll at 65%, taxing billionaires polls at 80%. The policies aren't the problem, the branding isn't the problem, the cowardice is the problem, the refusal to fight for what we claim to believe in, and the room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. Several members looked down at their hands, a few exchanged uncomfortable glances. Congressman Ro Khanna, sitting 2 seats from AOC, closed his eyes briefly as if bracing for impact, as if watching a car crash in slow motion, and Pelosi set her pen down slowly, deliberately, her hands flat on the table. "Cowardice," she repeated, and the word hung in the air, and "yes," AOC said, not backing down even an inch, her posture unchanging, her voice steady. "We let Republicans define us. We let them call us radicals and socialists and extremists. And instead of fighting back, instead of defending our values, we ran away from our own voters. We apologized for wanting health care and climate action and economic justice. We ran away from the very policies that people actually want. But our own voters," Pelosi said, leaning forward now, both hands flat on the table, her voice carrying the weight of experience and frustration, "are not just Brooklyn and the Bronx. They're not just college towns and progressive districts. They're Michigan auto workers. They're Nevada service workers. They're North Carolina nurses. And those voters don't want what you're selling. They don't want revolution. They want results. And then why?" AOC said, her voice cutting clean through Pelosi's sentence, not shouting but somehow louder than anyone else in the room. "Did every single one of my endorsed candidates in 2024 win their primaries? Why did they win in districts across the country? Why are young voters the only demographic we're actually growing with?" And there was silence. Complete, total silence. Someone coughed, a chair creaked. Outside, a siren passed on Constitution Avenue, and Pelosi's face remained stone, carved marble, but something flickered behind her eyes. Some acknowledgement that the point had landed. Primaries are not general elections, Congresswoman. Winning over party activists is not the same as winning over swing voters. And neither is this room, AOC said. But here we are, pretending that the reason we lost is because I fought too hard for healthcare. Not because leadership fought too little for anything. Not because we became the party of process instead of the party of people. And Congressman James Clyburn, the elder statesman from South Carolina, the man who arguably saved Biden's 2020 campaign, raised a weathered hand, his voice carrying the authority of age and survival. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, I think we need to—" "But no," AOC interrupted, still looking directly at Pelosi, only at Pelosi, as if no one else in the room existed. "I think we need to say what everyone in this room has been thinking but has been too afraid to say out loud, too afraid of offending the wrong people or losing their committee assignments." And Pelosi tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, controlled. "And what's that?" And that you're blaming the left for failures that started at the top, that you're scapegoating the squad for strategic decisions made by leadership, that you're more afraid of Fox News segments than of losing elections," AOC said, and the room froze, completely froze. Not a single person moved, even breathing seemed to stop. Even the staffers standing against the back wall went rigid, phones forgotten, and Pelosi's smile was thin, controlled, dangerous. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that precedes consequences. "Careful, Congresswoman, but why?" AOC's voice was calm, almost too calm, the calmness of someone who had already accepted whatever came next. "Are we not allowed to have this conversation? Are we not allowed to question strategy or point out failures because I thought that's why we were here, to figure out why we keep losing winnable elections?" And a long pause followed, stretched out, uncomfortable. Somewhere in the building, a door closed and the sound echoed. Congressman Richie Torres from New York shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal from Washington put her pen down carefully, her expression conflicted between institutional loyalty and ideological alignment, and Pelosi straightened in her chair, her posture perfect, every inch the speaker she used to be. "You want to lead this party?" And the question hung in the air like a challenge, like an accusation, like a dare, And AOC didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. "I want to win. And then you need to learn," Pelosi said, each word precise and measured, delivered with the certainty of experience, that winning means compromise. It means building coalitions with people you disagree with. It means not making yourself the story every single week. It means understanding that politics is the art of the possible, not the art of the perfect. And you need to learn, AOC said, matching her rhythm exactly, beat for beat. That compromise without conviction is just surrender, that you can't win elections by apologizing for who you are, that movements don't follow leaders who are afraid to lead. And Pelosi's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening just slightly. "I've won more elections than you voted in, Congresswoman. I've passed more legislation than you've introduced. I've built this party from the ground up, and I've energized more young voters," AOC replied instantly, without pause, without hesitation, "than your entire caucus combined. I've raised more small-dollar donations. I've brought more people into the process. I've made people care about politics who thought it was pointless." And there were gasps, real ones this time, audible shocked intakes of breath. Several members actually recoiled. Congressman Adam Schiff, sitting near the middle, looked like he was witnessing a car crash in slow motion and couldn't look away. Congresswoman Catherine Clark, Pelosi's deputy, started to stand as if to intervene, then sat back down, realizing there was no stopping this, and Pelosi stood, slowly, deliberately, her chair scraped against the floor with a sound that made everyone wince. "This meeting," she said, her voice low and cold, colder than anyone had heard it, "is over." And she walked toward the door. Her heels clicked against the marble in sharp staccato rhythm, final, definitive, and no one else moved, no one dared speak, and Pelosi reached the door, paused with her hand on the brass handle, and turned back, just slightly, just enough to deliver one final shot. "You think you're the future of this party?" she said, looking directly at AOC with an expression that mixed contempt and challenge. "Then prove it. Win something that matters. Win a swing district. Win a statewide race. Win something outside your bubble. Then we'll talk about the future." And then she walked out, and the door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot in the silence. And for a full 10 seconds, maybe 15, no one in the room moved, no one breathed. Everyone sat frozen like a photograph. And AOC sat perfectly still, her hands flat on the table, her expression unchanged, giving nothing away. And then, slowly, like ice breaking, Congressman Ro Khanna exhaled. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley closed her notebook with careful precision. Someone near the door whispered something urgent to a staffer who immediately pulled out their phone, and Hakeem Jeffries stood, his face carefully neutral, professionally blank. "We should all take a moment, maybe we reconvene tomorrow," and people began to file out slowly in small clusters. Some avoided eye contact with AOC as they passed, others nodded at her. A few younger members stopped to say something quietly, and Congressman Maxwell Frost, one of the youngest members of Congress, stopped near her chair. But he couldn't find the words, and "necessary," AOC said quietly, and outside in the hallway, a reporter checking Twitter saw the first leak. An anonymous Democratic staffer's tweet, "Shouting match in Dem caucus, Pelosi versus AOC, no cameras, really tense." And by 5:15 p.m., Pelosi AOC was trending on Twitter with 127,000 mentions and climbing. And by 5:45 p.m., Politico had 3 separate sources familiar with the meeting, confirming a heated exchange and unprecedented confrontation. And by 6 p.m., cable news had broken into regular programming. CNN's Chiron reading, "Democratic infighting, Pelosi and AOC clash behind closed doors." MSNBC running, "Party divided, squad challenges, Democratic leadership." And by 6:30 p.m., Fox News gleefully ran with "Democrat Civil War, Squad Challenges Pelosi, Party in Chaos." And by 7:30 p.m., Pelosi's communications director released a carefully worded statement drafted and redrafted 5 times, Speaker Emerita Pelosi believes healthy debate is an essential part of our democratic process. Today's caucus meeting reflected the kind of passionate discussion that makes our party stronger and more responsive to voters. But AOC didn't release a statement, didn't tweet, didn't post on Instagram, didn't call any reporters despite dozens of requests. She went back to her office, closed the door, and sat at her desk staring at nothing. And her chief of staff, Chakrabarti, knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. "You okay?" And AOC looked up. "Did I go too far?" And he thought for a long moment, weighing his words. "No, but you went somewhere you can't come back from. You just declared war on the most powerful Democrat alive." "And good," she said. "Maybe it's time." And by 8 p.m., her phone started ringing constantly. Other progressive members, allies, some worried about the consequences, some energized by the confrontation. Congressman Greg Casar from Texas texted, "That took guts, I'm with you." Congresswoman Summer Lee from Pennsylvania called to say, "About damn time someone said it. We've been too afraid too long." Congressman Jamal Bowman warned, "They're going to come for you now. Pelosi doesn't forget and she doesn't forgive. And let them," AOC said. "I'm not here to make friends with people who are afraid to fight." And by 9 p.m., the Washington Post published a 2,000-word piece titled, "Democratic Party at a Crossroads. Pelosi-AOC confrontation exposes generational rift that may define party's future." And by 10:01 p.m., Politico ran, "The fight for the soul of the Democratic Party just went public and neither side is backing down." And the next morning, at a press conference on climate legislation that had been scheduled weeks earlier, a reporter immediately asked AOC about the meeting, ignoring the actual topic, and she smiled slightly, just slightly. "We had a frank conversation about the direction of the party. That's democracy. That's how we get better." And "Did you call Speaker Pelosi a coward?" another reporter shouted. And "I said our messaging strategy has been cowardly. There's a difference between critiquing strategy and attacking people," AOC replied. And "Do you think you can win a leadership fight against her?" And AOC paused just for a moment, calculating, "I think the future wins eventually. I think movements win eventually. I think people who fight for what they believe in eventually win against people who fight to maintain power." And the clip went viral within an hour, 8 million views by noon, 15 million by evening, and later that week, Pelosi appeared on MSNBC for a pre-scheduled interview, and when asked about AOC, she was diplomatic but cold, each word chosen carefully. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is a talented communicator. She's good at social media. She's good at generating attention. But talent and leadership are not the same thing. Leadership requires building coalitions, making compromises, understanding that perfect is the enemy of good. And the party had split, not officially, not structurally, but everyone knew it. 2 visions, 2 generations, 2 incompatible futures, and no path back to unity.